Okay, let's talk about cascading style sheets. So here I have a simple HTML5 document. It's got the head here, the body, and within the body I have a H1 tag, a header, and then three divs, each div with some spans in it. When I look at this guy here, that's what it's going to look like. So by default. So the basic idea is that the HTML file is going to give me the structure of the document. It's going to say this is a H1 level heading, and the CSS file is going to tell me how that's going to look like. Now by default, the H1 is going to look like that. So you can see the bigger text, bolded, and with it's a little bit farther away. But say I wanted to change that. I wanted to change the color of it, or the font, or how much spacing there is, or I wanted to change the spacing in between these lines, or the font in these lines, or the background color. All those things, how the HTML document looks like, or the style of the document, goes in the CSS file. And so let's do that. We're going to give this page some style. The way we do that is we add this link here to the head. Inside the head, I say link rel style sheet. So I'm telling the browser this is going to be a style sheet. And then I give it the name of the file, right? So it's going to fetch this file from this directory. The browser is. And so I just now need to create that file called style.css. I'm going to right click, say new, other, CSS file, and I want to call style.css, finish. So now I have a CSS file. It's empty, so it's going to look the same even after I reload it. Let's say I want to change the body, the color of the text to blue. I do that, I reload the page, now boom, everything is blue. So let's look at this more carefully. What is this? So here we start with the body. This is what we call the CSS selector, or just a selector for short. So the body word in this case is the selector part of it. And then within the selector we have the property, which in this case is the color of the text, and its value. That property has a value in this case of blue. Right. So those are words that you need to know. The selector is this one. And then within the selector, this is a curly bracket, we have a property colon value semicolon, and we can have other properties like font size, and let's say make that 10 point like that. If I go back and reload it, then everything gets a little bit smaller. Make it more obvious. 5 points, teeny tiny 5 points. Right. So what is it saying is that everything within this style sheet says everything within the body is going to be of the color blue, text color blue, and of a font size 5 points. Let's get rid of that so that you can see what we're doing. And if you remember, our HTML file has a body, and within that body there are these divs. So I'm gonna go change the color of the divs themselves to green or red. So if I do that, how's it going to look like? Well, let's see. So you see the body, the H1 is still blue, and then within the divs, the bodies are red except for the links. These are still blue, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, so what's going on here? What's happening is, the way it works is when the browser, looks at the HTML and say it gets to this word cascading. So when it gets to that word, it says, okay, what color is this word going to be? Then it goes up and says, well, it's within this H1 tag. Does the H1 tag have a style? No. Okay. So then it goes up to the body. Okay, does the body have a style and a color? And it says, oh yes, blue. So therefore, the word cascading is going to be blue, right? But when you're over here, the word first, and the browser says, okay, what color is the word first going to be? It goes up to the div. Does the div have a style? Well, yes, it's red. Okay, so it's going to be red, and I stop. Right? It's going to be red, and I'm done. It doesn't go up to the body, right, as the cascading did. So you only go up if the particular property is not defined. So that's the way it works. It is the most specific. The browser is going to go up, up, and the most specific, or the first time it gets to the property, is going to stop. So in other words, it doesn't matter what order is. This is a common misconception. I can put this div up there and reload the page, and it's still going to look the same. It doesn't matter what order they are. Well, for this case, it doesn't matter what order they are in the CSS file. It's the specificity of it. Okay, so we have the body and the div selector. You can also, we have some spans in there. Let's change those to a color of green. So if I reload the page, you see now the spans are green, right? So the span, same rule, right? The span is within the div, which is within the body. So the span is going to be green. And so those are your simplest selectors, right? It just says all elements, all span elements are green, all body elements, there's only one, but and then all divs are red. Let's say that you wanted to go back over here. You say, well, there's 6 spans, but I want these ones have to do with price. So I want these in a different color, but not these. How do I do that? Well, in that case, you're going to need some help from the HTML. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a class attribute here. I'm going to call it price. It can be whatever word you want. Class equals price. So the class attribute is, or CSS class attribute, says that all these things belong to a class. Think of it, it's a semantic thing, like the price, right? These are all prices. I know as a human, I know what that means, and I want the prices to appear all in black. So how do I do that? I'm going to say dot price. Oops, wrong. Price color black. Right. So the dot is important. So dot name matches class equals name. And that should work. Let's see. So there you go. Reloaded and all the prices are now black. The other spans are still green because, again, the classes are more specific than the elements, right? So even though, here this is a span with a price and the span is green and the class is black, the class is more specific than the span or, the element. And so it's going to take on black. Right? And so that's how you match it. You do class matching. So you don't use the word class, you simply use a period there. Dot price. There's another matcher that we use a lot, and that's with the ID. So we talked about the IDs before. You remember there's an ID attribute in HTML, and you can give to elements. And the thing is that the value have to be unique for the page, right? So you cannot have 2 elements with the same ID value in one page. But you can use these IDs, come in very handy also for CSS. So you can select on those IDs with the hash. So you say hash first, that's going to match that div here with the ID of first, right? So in other words, hash name matches ID equals name, for whatever name you want. And let's say that's the first column. In this case, I want to, what? I'm going to change the width. Another thing I can do is I can change the width of the element. So let's go back here, and there you go. So I changed the width. So by default, a paragraph is going to flow all the way to the end of the page and then to the next line. And but it doesn't have to, right? So if I can change the style, I can say, well, the width of this paragraph is 100 pixels, which is, or about here. So it flows to 100 pixels, then it goes back and another one. And you can see I can move the paragraph at the bottom there changes, but not the one at 100 pixels wide. That doesn't change at all. It's 100 pixels. Right? And I can do that for these guys here, for the first, second, and the third. Second, third. Right? And they're all now 100 pixels. You know, they don't have to be all the same. Of course, let's make it more interesting. Make that one 300 pixels. Now that one's 300, 100, 300, 100. And now that's so by default. You see, by default, the divs. Each time you end a div, it's like a paragraph. So in each time you start a new paragraph, you go to the next line down. Let's say you don't want to do that. There's a CSS property called float that you can say. So float means, you know, instead of laying things normally, you're gonna float them left. It's hard to use that. So if I said that guy to float left, so the first guy floats left, and the next one goes after him. But then, you know, after this guy, we got a new line still. So maybe I want to also float the second guy. And there you go. I'll float the second guy, and now I'll float the third guy. So float the first, second, third, and now I get, you know, a 3-column layout. Nice. You see, you know, as I change the width, it's still, because the widths are fixed, it doesn't matter if I change the width of the browser. Another thing you can do with CSS is the values can come in any, and you have different types of values. So you can say 100 pixels, or you could also say 20%, meaning 20% of the width of the enclosing div. So if I say 20%, you know, 60% for this one and 20% for this one, that adds up to 100, right? And when I reload, it's like that fills the whole page. And if I change the size of the browser, you see that they keep, you know, the first one's still 20%. It's always going to be 20% of the size of the enclosing div, which in this case is the HTML tag, so it's the width of the page. And of course, I don't have to add up to 100. I mean, I could have gone with, let's say I wanted 2020 and 20% there. And the third one, I wanted that definitely 200 pixels. We do that, reload. So the middle one is 200 pixels, so it doesn't change in width, but the other two do, like that. There's tons of CSS properties. You should go to the CSS reference and go through the tutorial, and it'll tell you some of the most important ones. And you know, that way you can, you know, just learn by doing, try some of the tutorials, see what all of them do. The last thing, as I'm talking about selectors, so we talked about the name selector, sorry, the class selector, which is the dot, the ID selector, which is the hash. There's also for the links, right? So let's go back here. I have a link here, and it goes there. So you see, after I click it, it changes color. So links are a little bit special because you know, they have the state before they're clicked, the state after they're clicked, and also the state when you're hovering over them. So what does that mean? Okay, let me show you. Let's say I'm gonna say a colon hover. Oops, let me move this down here. That goes over there. Yeah. So when somebody hover over it, I want the color to be green. Is that gonna work? Let me see. So here they are. See, as I hover over it, it changes to green and then goes back to purple. It's hard to tell. So the hover is green, and otherwise it changes color. You can make it more obvious by changing the font size to, I don't know, 40 pixels. That's gonna be good. So when I hover, boom, it gets big, and then I go away, it gets small again, big, small, big, small. So the hover is it's also known as, you know, the colon dot hover. It's known as a pseudo element or selector. Let's go over here. Pseudo. You have the pseudo element here. And there you go. These are some of them. There's the after, before, after first letter selection. I'm sorry. What we wanted was the pseudo classes. We'll get into pseudo elements before. So the pseudo classes are for the link, right? So this hover, focus, active. So active is when you're actually your mouse button is down. Visited is when the link has been visited, and the link is a link. And then there's some other ones you can use. But basically, they all start with a colon, and you can read the documentation to learn a little bit more about them. Mostly, the standard ones we use are hover, and visited, and active. Uh, so that's a pseudo element, and this is what the page looks like when you hover over it. So you see it gets activated and deactivated based on the user's actions, right? So you can do some, simple animation type things, or you can change the page just on the CSS. You just using CSS without any JavaScript. So I'm changing the page a little bit by just using CSS.